So my notebook is my writer's playground. And this is where I test my ideas. I quickly, as I mentioned already, disqualify most. They're just not that interesting. But you get better as you go on at finding out which ones have the most potential. And into those ones you delve deep. And these ones seem to contain the richest story elements, the best characters, the greatest moments, the most fun. And fun, I can't underestimate, is such a big part of what motivates you as a writer. So I blueprint, I outline, I do flowcharts, I doodle. This is what I get to do in my notebook. And I typically spend months on the stage until I have the general ingredients of a story. And then I move to outline. So I try to write down every major event that I imagine is going to happen in my story in a chronological order. I'm a bit of a control freak. Every writer is different. Get a different writer up here, they'll tell you a totally different story about their creative process. But I like having a plan. And it starts off looking fairly orderly. Doesn't that look good? It looks like this book is going to be a piece of cake. But I spend a lot of time on the outlines. I ask myself more questions. I challenge it. I add things. I take things away. Before long, I'm writing in the margins. I'm writing at the top and bottom. I'm writing upside down. It looks like I'm writing a crazed manifesto. And some things just get rejected outright. This was a bad idea. It's not going into the book. And only when I think I have a good beginning and middle and end will I sit down, maybe an end, will I sit down and write those terrifying words, chapter 1, and see how far I get. The first draft for most writers is the hardest. No matter how much brainstorming and blueprinting you've done, the fact is you've never really fully prepared yourself. You can't really know the story or the characters until you start literally, physically putting sentence after sentence down on paper or screen and writing line after line of dialogue. That's how you really start to know your story. And typically with the first draft, I get stuck early on, and I hate everything I've written. And kids should never feel bad about getting stuck. If you're ever in a classroom situation where your kids are doing creative writing, it's okay. It's natural. I get stuck all the time. Often what I do at this stage is I think more about the characters and story. I might go back to the beginning and start afresh, try again. And I'll get farther this time. And at this point, I don't always work chronologically. More and more now, I jump around to wherever I think the best scene is. So I'm going all over the place. If I'm stuck here, I'll jump into the future of the story. And sometimes jigsaw puzzle-like jumping ahead allows you to figure out what might need to happen around that moment in the story. And you sort of suture your story together more like a quilt than the roadmap that I often use sometimes. So you're binding your story together from all these different bits. But I try to ultimately piece together a complete rough draft so I get to the end, or what I think is the end. So the writing is sloppy, the characters are thin, there are plot holes the size of whole Matrix movies you could fit through them. And I also tell young writers, don't edit yourself as you write. You're going to do that later. Write every sentence that comes to mind, even if you think it is terrible. Sometimes I have to write a lot of terrible sentences to get to a good one. And your best ideas will often come to you while you're in the physical act of writing. I truly believe there's something that happens between our hand and our brain that stimulates ideas. It's much more productive than just sort of sitting with your fists clenched, staring at the screen, trying to think through a problem or a scene. Write it, and the ideas will come much more quickly. The only mistake you can really make at this stage is not writing. And I wish I followed this advice more often myself. Anyway, it's done. That's the first draft. Look at it. It's all dog-eared. There's coffee stains, might be blood, who knows. So I let my wife read it at this stage, and she makes helpful comments, and I used to read it aloud to my two older kids, who are now really too old to indulge me in this way. But they used to be so useful, because when I read aloud, I could tell when they were excited. They didn't need to say a word. You know, they voted with their bodies. When they were bored, I knew that too. They'd get restless, they'd look at their shoes, they'd play with their phones. But when they were excited, they would actually lean physically closer to me, like they were trying to get inside the story itself. And that's when I knew I had their attention. That's when you knew something's really happening. You've probably had this experience if you read aloud to students. You know when you have them. And to a writer, this is very important. So I make notes in the margins as I go, because when I'm done, I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning and do another draft. It's better, it's not finished. So I'll probably do another revision. This is what I call my first draft. Now maybe it's my fourth, I don't know. It makes me feel better to call it my first. It's good, it's not great, but at this point I let it leave the house and send it to my publishers. And I have 3 in the English-speaking world, one in Canada, one in the US, and one in Britain. And they, of course, are going to send their comments back to me. So from Canada, here it comes like an anvil landing on my desk, wham! This is my manuscript all marked up. It starts with something called a cover letter. It's a devious document, which usually lulls you into a false sense of security. It'll begin, "Dear Ken, what a wonderful story Half-Brother is. What an interesting premise. What intriguing characters. However," and then there's 10 pages of however. Not only that, but if you look at the side, it's just, bristling with Post-it notes. On every one of those is an evil little comment, asking me to rethink or change something. So I've got that. That's just from Canada. From the US, bam. He liked to do his comments in the margin here in track changes. Look at that. That's just page 1. Doesn't he have a lot to say for himself? I don't like to mention names, but this was David Levitan at Scholastic. He's a smart guy and everything, but some people really should keep their thoughts to themselves. So that was him. And then It's Not Over from England. I get another set of comments. Wham, it lands on the pile. And, hey, it doesn't look so bad, you're thinking. But remember, all this page says is Half-Brother by Kenneth Oppel. She still found stuff to complain about there in the margin. So there is no pleasing some people. So I have to compile all their criticisms and my own. My list is the longest because I know the story more intimately than anyone. And I really do want to make it good. So I go back to work and I do another draft. So this would be close to the final draft of Half-Brother. If you saw a cross-section, I like showing this to kids because they're all sort of traumatized. This is the sort of the pile that sort of goes through all the different drafts of one particular book. So it's about 18 to 24 months for me from those, wonderful, exuberant doodlings in my ideas notebook, through the outlines, through the drafts, and the edits.